Hey everybody, welcome to the second episode of our four-part series responding to Inspiring Philosophy's supposed biblical errors, the Census of Quirinius, biblical error number 1, link in the description. If you missed last week's video, here's a link for you to check it out. And now, take it away, favorite uncle.
The second supposed error assumes Augustus would not have conducted censuses in vassal kingdoms like that of Herod the Great. But there is also historical data to challenge this. Josephus tells us around 7 BC, Herod fell out of favor with Augustus and was treated more like a subject than a friend. This means Herod's autonomy would have been taken away. Add to that the fact that Herod was getting old and his sons would fight for future rule of the area. So it would have been a perfect time to assess the region before Herod died to prepare the future of the area. Josephus also tells us the people of Herod's domain swore allegiance to Herod and Augustus, which leads us to the conclusion Rome had a greater involvement in Herod's kingdom, and it was not so autonomous.
IP says we have to assume, as was the case with Judea and other provinces not directly under Roman rule, there was no Roman census. Instead of assuming, let's see if we can find the facts. One, on this map of the Roman Empire, dated 14 CE, we can see there are 17 client states. They're the yellow ones, and near present-day Israel, they include these 4 provinces. Galilee and Perea, with Herod Antipas as the tetrarch, and Batany and Tichonitis, with Herod's son Philip as tetrarch. These 4 provinces would be annexed by Rome in the year 93 CE, but they, like the rest of the provinces marked in yellow, were still client states at the turn of the century. What do we find regarding taxation? When we find a census, poll tax, or any other type of taxation, it is not directly enforced by the Roman military or even a Roman procurator. Instead, it is performed by the client king, who, like Herod the Great, was chosen by Caesar. We also know Herod would perform his own taxation and would, sometimes, but not always, provide tribute to Caesar. Thus, there is no reason to assume anything other than that which is evident. Rome did not directly enforce a census in client states.
In Antiquities, Book 16, Part 9, Josephus records pretty much what IP said. Caesar was pissed off at Herod, and for good reason. He had sent his army and, seemingly without cause, laid waste to the Arabians, murdering over 2,500 of their seemingly innocent soldiers, and had his own soldiers steal all the riches of Repta, the city they had destroyed. Now, before he had heard the entire story, Caesar stormed off and wrote Herod a strongly worded letter. If you know anything about Caesar, you know these letters are never good. According to Josephus, this is the breakdown. Whereas of old he had used him as his friend, he should now use him as his subject. Ah, snap! He was no longer a friend of Herod, but rather saw the king of the Jews as a subject. Break out the celebration wine for IP, folks, because he's right. It's time to assess the kingdom for taxation. Ah, yeah! Wait, hold on, what? Wait, are you sure? All right, stop the music. We got ourselves a Paul Harvey moment. So here's what really went down. Caesar had recently made Herod ruler over Trachonitis, a province north and east of Judea, and home to a bunch of people who apparently just loved robbing folks. Josephus says this: the inhabitants of Trachonitis had not now power to rob, but were forced to plow the land and to live quietly, which was a thing they did not like.
So, while Herod was off in Rome persuading Caesar to provide protection to his son Antipater, the Trachonites spread a rumor Herod had died, and they revolted, robbing their neighbors. Herod's army caught many of the thieves, but apparently 40 of them fled the country, heading for Arabia. While there, they found protection with a man named Sylleus.
Sylleus, as it turns out, is super important in this story. He also had a little bit of a beef with Herod. You see, Herod had a sister, Salome, and she was, needless to say, powerful, cunning, and apparently very pretty. While working for Augustus, king of Arabia, and having dinner with Herod, Sylleus, quote, saw Salome and set his heart upon her, and understanding that she was a widow, he discoursed with her.
Salome was also a bit petty. When she met Sylleus, she and Herod weren't exactly on good terms. So, quote, she looked upon Sylleus with some passion, and was very earnest to be married to him. And on the days following there appeared many, and those very great indications of their agreement together.
So then the rumors started, and you know how rumors go. Herod invited both of them to dinner and saw, by the signals which came from their heads and their eyes, they both were evidently in love. Sylleus apparently understands what's going on and leaves town for a couple months. Then, I guess assuming Herod would be cool with it, came back and asked to marry Salome. He even brought with him some ammunition. He was from Arabia, and his marriage into the family would guarantee Herod's power would extend even further.
So, Herod talks it over with Salome, who immediately agrees. Herod's one stipulation: Sylleus has to convert to Judaism, which meant he would also have to be circumcised. Sylleus said there was no way he could do that, because if the Arabs found out, they would stone him. Herod stood his ground, saying it was impossible to get around, and Sylleus went away, discouraged.
So we come back to the present and find Sylleus obviously still had some anger aimed at Herod, because when the Trachonites fled to the shelter of Arabia, he was the one who, quote, gave them a place of strength in which they dwelt. Josephus even says it was because he couldn't marry Salome.
So these thieves are out robbing seemingly everybody in Herod's kingdom, all under the protection of Sylleus. Herod comes back, sees what's going on, realizes he can't attack the thieves in Arabia, and decides to go all mob boss all them by killing their families in Trachonitis.
Yeah, the robbers weren't having any of this. Because it's a law of theirs to avenge the deaths of their family members, they ran roughshod over the lands of Herod, killing and robbing all they could find. Herod then spoke with two Romans who were in Syria, Governor Saturninus and Procurator Volumnius, and informed them he had created a fair way to end the war. In 30 days, the robbers would be handed over to him. The 60 talents he lent to Sylleus would be repaid, and Herod would hand over any Trachonite prisoners.
Sylleus, who was now basically in charge in Arabia, was all, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not hiding any thieves. And Herod was all, Sylleus, I can see them behind you. We're in a desert, man. There aren't any trees for them to hide behind. And Sylleus responds, man, you're seeing things. Do you need some water? Are you dehydrated? Here, I'll go get you a drink.
Unbeknownst to Herod, Sylleus is not in fact going to get him an ice-cold refreshing Mountain Dew. Now, by dawn on the 30th day, Sylleus was on his way to Rome. Now you'll never guess what he's going there for. Hashtag foreshadowing.
Herod wakes up and realizes he doesn't have a savory Mountain Dew or any of the money he demanded. He gets back on the phone with Saturninus and Volumnius and is all, see, I told you they wouldn't listen. Now can I lead an attack into Arabia? Saturninus and Volumnius are all, fine, but make it quick. We've got a lunch date with Cleopatra.
Herod took his entire army into Arabia, marched for 3 days, found the thieves, and utterly decimated them and destroyed their garrison at Repta. But they didn't harm anybody else or any other property. Some Arabians came to the assistance of the Trachonites, and while retreating to Judea, Herod's soldiers killed about 20 Arabians. He arrested and punished the remaining robbers, put 3,000 Idumeans in Trachonitis to keep the peace, and sent a letter to the Phoenician military saying he had only done what he had to do. The Phoenicians looked into it and, quote, found no more than what was true. All good, right?
See, this is where we get to the present. Caesar is in a room, likely going all pissed off Kylo Ren on the walls, and there's a dude probably sitting in a chair smirking to himself. His name? Sylleus. That sneaky little bitch had a plan in mind, and it was working exactly as he wanted. He hurried off to Rome before Herod knew he was gone, heard about the battles, and devised a scheme to get back at the king of the Jews. He changed into all black, went before Caesar, and said this: Arabia was afflicted with war, and that all his kingdom was in great confusion upon Herod's laying it waste with his army. And he said, with tears in his eyes, that 2,500 of the principal men among the Arabians had been destroyed, and that their captain Nisibis, his familiar friend and kinsman, was slain, and that the riches that were at Repta were carried off, and that Augustus was despised, whose infirm state of body rendered him unfit for war, on which account neither he nor the Arabian army were present.
Now this dude had it all figured out, and his plan was working to perfection. He wrote a letter to the Arabians informing them Caesar now despised Herod, to which the Arabians didn't pay any money due on their property and hid additional robbers from Herod's armies. Herod sent emissaries to Caesar, but the emperor wouldn't see them. Things looked really bleak for Herod, and it didn't look much better for Nathaniel and Susan as they created this video. Then a crazy thing happened. The truth.
Herod had sent Nicholas to Rome to speak with Caesar, and speak he did. You see, Nicholas had his own little ace up his sleeve. As it turned out, the Arabians, while they fought with Herod's armies, didn't like each other very much either. Without Sylleus' knowledge, some defected, joined Nicholas, and sang like crested larks. They produced evidence that Sylleus, and those close to him, had slaughtered a great number of King Augustus's friends. This was, of course, because Sylleus wanted to weaken the king and take his throne at his death. When the robbers defected, they brought the evidence and letters to Nicholas, who took the letters with him to Rome.
As fate would have it, it just so happened Nicholas was in Rome at the same time as the ambassadors of Aretas of Arabia. They were in Rome because King Augustus had died, and Aretas wished to govern the province and gain the permission and protection of Caesar. They were also there to accuse Sylleus of murder and attempting to take the kingdom for himself. They had tried once before, but had been rebuffed by Caesar. On this day, though, probably because the gods love a good movie, these ambassadors were in the same room as Herod's ambassador Nicholas, who held in his hands letters from the robbers who had defected.
Nicholas said this of Sylleus: He imputed to him the destruction of the king Augustus, and of many others of the Arabians, that he had borrowed money for no good design, and he proved that he had been guilty of adultery, not only with the Arabians, but Roman women also. He then went on, above all the rest, he had alienated Caesar from Herod, and that all that he had said about the actions of Herod were falsities. Upon hearing this, Caesar stood up and said,
Stop! Tell me only of Herod. Has he not led an army into Arabia, nor slain 2,500 men there, nor taken prisoners, nor pillaged the country?
I shall principally demonstrate that either nothing at all, or but a very little of those imputations are true. For had they been true, you would justly have been still more angry at Herod.
Go on.
There was a debt due to Herod of 500 talents, wherein it was written that if the time appointed were elapsed, it should be lawful to make a seizure out of any part of his country. As for the pretended army, it was no army, but rather a party sent out to require the just payment of the money, which was not paid immediately as the time allowed. But Sylleus had frequently come before Saturninus and Volumnius, the presidents of Syria, and that at last he had sworn at Berytus, by your fortune, that he would certainly pay the money within 30 days and deliver up the fugitives that were under his dominion. And when he didn't do this, Herod came again before the presidents, and upon their permission to make a seizure for his money, he, with difficulty, went out of his country with a party of soldiers for that explicit purpose. And this is all the war which these men so tragically describe, and this is the affair of the expedition into Arabia. And how can this be called a war? Your presidents permitted it. The covenants allowed it, and it was not executed until your name, O Caesar, as well as that of other gods, had been profaned.
Oh, shit.
And allow me to continue. I must speak about the captives. There were robbers that lived in Trachonitis. At first their number was no more than 40, but they became more afterwards, and they escaped the punishment Herod would have inflicted on them by making Arabia their refuge. Sylleus received them and supported them with food so they might be mischievous to all mankind. He gave them a country to inhabit, and he received the gains they made by robbery. Yet he promised he would deliver up these men, and that by these same oaths he swore and fixed for payment of his debt. Nor can he by any means show that, beside these prisoners, any other persons have at this time been taken out of Arabia. Indeed, not all these either, but only so many as could not conceal themselves. And thus does the calumny of the captives, which has been so odiously represented, appear to be no better than a fiction and a lie made on purpose to provoke your indignation? For I venture to affirm, when the forces of the Arabians came upon us, and 1 or 2 of Herod's party fell, he then only defended himself, and there fell their general, and, in all, about 25 others, and no more. Sylleus, by multiplying every single soldier to 100, he reckons the slain to have been 2,500.
At this, Caesar, probably angrier than he had ever been in his life, turned to Sylleus, who was likely trying to sink into the floor and blend into the walls at the same time, and asked, "Sylleus, how many Arabians did you say Herod murdered?" Sylleus looked around the room, hesitated, considered his options, and said he had been forced to tell Caesar the lies. But then Nicholas and the ambassadors of Aretas read aloud the letters about the money he had borrowed, the letters of the presidents of Syria confirming the loans, and the letters of the leaders of several cities who had suffered due to his actions. Checkmate, motherfucker.
Sylleus could no longer lie, and he was forced to pay the debt he owed to Herod before being led away to die. Before allowing him to leave in the custody of Roman soldiers, Caesar chastised Sylleus, saying that by lying, he was guilty of ingratitude against Herod, a man Caesar considered a friend.
And Caesar was reconciled to Herod and, quote, owned his repentance for what severe things he had written him. They remained friends until Herod died in March 4 BCE, and Augustus approved the king's last will and testament, splitting his kingdom into a tetrarchy. So the claim that IP made about Herod being, quote, more of a subject than a friend? Not at all true. And we'll leave you with this quote from R.L. Fox. Caesar Augustus and Herod had conflicts, some of them rather tenuous, but their conflicts never caused the removal of Herod's royal status, the only way in which his kingdom could have been taxed on the Roman model in accordance from the Roman emperor. IP's scenario, including assessing an area for taxation or his sons fighting for control, only works if Josephus is taken out of context.
And now you know the rest of the story.